So this lecture is on work and achievement for women. This is chapter 10 in your textbook, and we'll see how far we can get through with this first piece, and I'll make sure I talk about at the end what all we've covered. All right. So if you think about women's unpaid work, there's relational work, there's raising kids, there's general care and feeding of others, there's home maintenance. Then we'll talk more about actual paid work, women in the paid workforce, and then probably we'll save sexual harassment and making a difference in terms of women working in social policy. We'll talk about those in my next lecture. So anyway, let's talk about women's unpaid work and women working in the paid workforce. Okay, so how about unpaid work that's expected of women? Okay, and oftentimes this is all the work that's not even recognized as work. So this is a lot of what women are expected to do. It's not paid. It's not formally defined as work. This is women taking care of their houses, their children, and their husbands. And this happens virtually everywhere in the world. Women work longer hours than men and have less leisure time. I think we've talked about that before in this class. And that's comes from the data put together by the United Nations in 2010. Relational work, let's define that, is emotional work that's caring for others' emotional needs. And this is examples of this include listening and talking to family members about their concerns and problems, putting celebrations together for important milestones like family birthdays and holidays. Those are just a couple of examples. But women are primarily responsible for relational work. It's often unacknowledged as even as work. But keeping harmony in the family has long been defined as women's work, as Parsons and Bales discussed in 1955. More recently, in a study of marital interaction in which more than 100 couples kept diaries about their communication patterns, wives did more relational work than husbands. We also see that couples who balance emotional work with each partner doing about the same amount, these couples find more satisfaction in their marriages than couples in which one person is responsible for doing most of it. And how about those additional other types of unpaid work that women are responsible for or expected to do? For instance, what about housework? Housework, what housework? Women worry too much about this, right? That's easy to say if you are not the one expected to be doing it all. If you are the male husband in the household. Doing laundry, cooking the meals, which includes shopping, prepping the food, getting everyone to the table, actually cooking the food, cleaning up the pots, the pans, and the actual dishes, cleaning up the kitchen afterward, keeping the fridge cleaned out, keeping the house in order with the appliances working, painting and upkeeping the house, keeping the bills paid, keeping the cars in good running order, taking things for oil changes and tire rotations, keeping the yard in decent condition, shopping for clothing for the kids, parenting children, emotional bonding, teaching kids about how to live life, deal with school demands, friendships, chores, sports, service work, church work, taking children and family members to doctor's appointments, caring for sick ones in the family, caring for elder family members, cleaning. Wow, I hadn't even touched on cleaning, which is a huge job in itself. All these things are important. And still primarily women's work. So even though it feels like we're moving towards more egalitarian marriages and partnerships, according to the UN 2010, the pattern is still consistent across cultures. Compared to men, women are doing less paid work, have more unpaid work, work longer hours, and have less leisure time. Housework in general is considered trivial and undervalued, but what's key to consider is that these tasks require both basic skills as well as complex relationship skills and intimate knowledge of the people being cared for. So you really can't outsource a lot of this work. And we see this devaluation of this work in our language. For instance, how do you answer the question if you're a woman? When somebody asks you, what do you do for your job? When you're a stay-at-home, you say, stay-at-home mom, you say, oh, I don't work, or I stay at home, which shows the lack of value that we give this work. And as a nation, we deny that this work is socially necessary. The USDL doesn't include housework in the Dictionary of Occupational Titles, and the monetary value of this work is not computed into the GNP, gross national product. So the U.S. officially denies that this work is valuable or necessary. Costs and benefits of invisible work. Okay, so all this invisible work that women are responsible for, there are definite costs of this invisible work, and there as well as a few benefits. There are some important terms we should acknowledge here. What is status-enhancing work, and what is a two-person career? Well, both of these terms are refer to work that women do in addition to the other types of invisible work that we've already discussed. This is specific situations when the wife serves as a contributor to their husband's career. So these are examples of this would be a corporate wife who's doing a lot of entertaining for her husband's clients, a military wife who's doing a lot of work to support her husband's military career, a politician's wife as well, doing a lot of all sorts of things like outreach or political activism. It could be all sorts of things to support a husband's political career. The cost of this invisible work, oftentimes it restricts a woman's freedom of action. It ties her fate to her spouse's success. So that's problematic. And another problem is that often women who are in these roles are expected to only be satisfied through vicarious achievement. It's when they don't have satisfaction based on their own achievement, but only on satisfaction based on the husband's success or the children's success. This is vicarious achievement, okay? So the question is, can only men have this two-person career? Well, the answer to that used to be yes. But now we do see a few female executives today that have stay-at-home husbands who are able to assume the role that was a traditionally female role. But mostly we still see that, yes, only men can have two-person careers. And oftentimes a female employee may appear less desirable than her male colleague because she doesn't have his invisible support staff. She doesn't have the stay-at-home spouse. And we see this in some data that we can look at that shows that high-level female executives are much less likely to be married than high-level male executives. Male executives are also significantly more likely to have spouses as full-time homemakers than female executives. And mostly men are seen as bringing two people to their jobs because women have their family duties and are seen as bringing less than one person to the job, right? Much less two. So let's talk about occupational segregation. When workers are concentrated in particular jobs, then we can call this occupational segregation, okay? So this is a different distribution in jobs of men and women, okay? And this fosters inequality between groups. So even in jobs where we don't see segregation, horizontal or vertical segregation, so when men and women are in equivalent jobs, such as corporate management, when that occurs, women are still expected to be more caring and supportive than men. And these expectations reflect that nature of gender stereotypes that women are more nurturing, and they should be. And we see this because caring fits into a feminine stereotype. So it is often seen as a natural byproduct of being female rather than a specific aspect of job competence, which is what it really should be seen as, is a job skill, right? We also see this play out where we see jobs that where women's jobs take place in sexually objectified environments. And we see in research that this, unfortunately, is also linked to women's self-objectification, women's body shame, women's depression, and women's lower job satisfaction, right? So that's problematic, right? Okay, so let's talk about the wage gap, because this is a really big issue, okay? So what is the wage gap? Well, this is that women earn less money than men for the same work. And women of color earn even less than white women. So there's this wage gap occurs within women, different ethnic groups of women. It also occurs in different groups for men. So we'll see that the Pew Research Group 2016 showed that in general, white women earn 82 cents for every dollar that a white man earns. Women of color earn 65 cents for every dollar a white man earns. Black men earn 73 cents for every white man's dollar. So there's the wage gap is definitely there, and it's purely based on ethnicity and gender. Now we do see the wage gap narrowing for younger workers. So if you look at women ages 25 to 34, their wage gap had narrowed a little bit. They were earning 89 cents for every dollar for a man in the same age group earned. Okay, so that's the wage group. It's very disturbing. Economists have calculated that a female college graduate will earn over a lifetime of work $1.2 million less than a male college graduate. So we do see that the gender gap in wages has decreased somewhat over the past 55 years, but it's still discouraging for women. Although we should see that the wage gap is even greater around the world than it is in the United States. Women in most countries earn about 60 to 75% of the wages earned by men, and this is according to the United Nations in 2016. So part of the reason for the wage gap is the differences that we see in performance evaluation for men and women. We do know that there's clearly bias against women that's particularly strong in science-related fields in terms of evaluation of performance. Over and over, studies have found that people evaluate men and women differently, okay? Whenever gender is perceived as salient, right? Which means that they stereotypically, there is a bias against female scientists. Now, there's a great area for intersectionality to be evaluated because we don't know very much about how racial or ethnic bias interacts with gender bias in evaluating women's performance. There's not much studies that have been done yet looking at that, but we can guess that's going to impact women additionally, women of color additionally, that they might have ethnic bias or racial bias in addition to gender bias affecting them in terms of performance evaluations. Why does a lot of this evaluation bias might be unintentional, but doesn't make it any less problematic. But it might be intentional because people have implicit attitudes and beliefs that they often realize they're often not even aware of. We've discussed these before. So this evaluation bias may occur because of these implicit attitudes. Again, that women's agency, competence, and leadership are incongruent with gender stereotypes of women. And people definitely rely on these stereotypes when they're evaluating others. So if we think in terms of discrimination in hiring and promotion, although the Civil Rights Act of 1964 made sex discrimination illegal in terms of hiring and promotion, that means discrimination based on gender, a great deal of discrimination still occurs. A meta-analysis of 49 studies in 2000 still showed a strong preference for men when the job was seen as masculine, and a somewhat weaker but still a preference for women when the job was seen as feminine, right? Discrimination promotion may occur because overt displays of competence in the women are often a threat to gender hierarchies, right? And the pattern of discriminations are often hard to see. They're only apparent when many cases are averaged, and discrimination is usually only examined one case at a time, right? Because discrimination in hiring and promotion definitely gets examined in legal cases, as opposed to there's not really other ways to measure it, unfortunately. So let's talk about when someone is the token woman at work. So what does that mean when you're a token woman at work? It means a token is an odd person. So it's when you're the lone person out. When you're the one woman of color in a all male office, or the one female in a male dominated field such as science or IT. It puts a lot of performance pressure on the woman because of the visibility. It can also be socially isolating. You may feel very stereotyped. We see when we have this effect with men, with male tokens, which is a man in a female-dominated occupation. We have a good friend, for example, who's a nurse, and oftentimes token men in female-dominated occupations experience what's called the glass escalator, which is when they fare better than women in the same occupation and advance more quickly because people perceive them as being in the wrong job. So because they're men, they're stereotyped as in the wrong job, and so, oh, you're a man, you need to be in an administrator role. So we're gonna push you up the escalator. So rather than feeling the effects of the glass ceiling, which is being unable to advance in their career, men are often put on glass escalators, which means they are pushed ahead in their careers because of gender stereotyping. Okay. Another thing that's important to talk about in terms of token women and women in general is the importance of mentoring. A mentor is someone who takes a personal interest in a newcomer and helps guide them towards success in their career. Mentoring has become a very big thing. Mentoring traditionally occurred by what we term good old boy networks. And this is men looking out for each other's interests. And this was typically men in white male job networks who got twice as many job leads as others, and their connections were to higher status people. And this is research by McDonald in 2011. In terms of women in mentoring, women often have difficulty finding mentors, more difficulty than men in finding mentors. But in tough corporate climates, senior male mentors are very beneficial to women, can give women legitimacy and sponsorship. We've seen research that showed in industries where there were only a few women, or where there was a very aggressive, engineering-intensive corporate culture. Women who had male mentors were able to earn more money and were happier with their career progress than women with female mentors or no mentors at all. We do see, though, that women may be better mentors for women in creating professional self-image empowerment and supportive personal, and in providing supportive personal counseling, right? Okay, women as leaders. Let's talk about that a little bit. No matter how research is measured, stereotypes of leaders are much more similar to stereotypes of men than they are to stereotypes of women. So being accepted as leaders may still be a problem for women due to this lingering stereotype that they don't have the right stuff to be leaders. If you look at a meta-analysis that was done of 95 studies of leadership effectiveness, it showed that there were no overall gender differences. It's not really true that women are not effective as effective as men at leadership. There were no gender differences in leadership effectiveness in 95 studies that looked at it. So the last thing I want to mention before we end this presentation, leadership styles. There was a big study that looked at leadership styles of men and women, and showed that there's a reason why the women are just as effective as men as leaders, because women actually are rated higher than men on certain leadership styles. Several positive attributes such as motivating others, showing optimism about goals, mentoring others, being considerate, rewarding others for good performance. Women were rated higher on these leadership styles. Men were more likely to be critical about others' mistakes, to be absent or uninvolved during crises, and to wait until problems were severe before trying to solve them. So on these particular traits of leaders, women were found to be better off in terms of leadership styles. Unfortunately, any advantages that women may have in these leadership styles may be offset by the resistance of men in power to accept women as leaders. All right? Okay, so that wraps up this presentation. Next time we will start out talking about sexual harassment that women experience in their jobs.